Cloning is the process of producing clones. Clones being organisms with the exact same DNA, right down to the base pairs. Cloning does not often happen with sexual reproduction, although it can, in the case of identical twins. Cloning can happen in many ways, both artificially and naturally. We will begin by first discussing a few different methods of cloning.
Artificially cloning multicellular organisms is done through a process called somatic cell nuclear transfer. A somatic cell is taken from an organism that you want to clone, and an unfertilized egg is taken from a surrogate mother. In this example, the organism we want to clone shall be referred to as the prize organism. The cell taken from the prize organism can be almost any type of cell, remembering that regardless of the cell's function, they all contain the same DNA.
The somatic cell is enucleated, which is to say that you remove the nucleus, and the rest of the cell is then discarded. The egg cell is also enucleated, but the nucleus is instead discarded to produce an empty egg cell. The somatic nucleus is inserted into the empty cell to form a zygote, which is chemically or electrically kick-started into performing mitosis. It should be noted that this takes place in a controlled environment to better ensure the survival of the zygote.
Once successfully replicating, it is placed back into the surrogate mother, where it will grow into a fully formed organism containing the exact same DNA as the prize organism.
The newly created prize organism will not resemble the surrogate mother, as it contains none of her DNA.
Some plants clone themselves without intervention of humans. Strawberries, for example, send out runners with root formations at their tips. Once the roots have established a root system in the soil, a new genetically identical strawberry plant will then grow. The runner then shrivels up, leaving you with the original plant and its clone, which is then also free to send out runners when it sees fit.
Tissue culture is a method of artificially cloning some species of plants by taking advantage of their natural cloning ability. It is done as follows. Small amounts of tissue are harvested from the parent organism. The tissue samples are transferred to an agar plate where plant hormones are added to stimulate growth. Each small tissue sample then develops into a tiny plantlet, a miniature version of each parent plant that can then be transferred into pots to grow into fully fledged plants. These new plants contain the exact same DNA as the plant from which their original small tissue samples were taken, thus making them clones.
So we've proven ourselves adept at cloning, but why would we want to clone things? The answer is that cloning can be used in the agricultural and medical fields to allow us to better ourselves and the environment.
Cloning can be used to revive an endangered species by making multiple copies of a single individual organism to continue the genetic line. This is a viable route for some plants and animals that are exceedingly rare or difficult to breed in captivity.
This is occurring in Australia with the rare Grevillea scapigera that currently has a clone performing well in culture. There are several marked disadvantages as to why you aren't currently seeing clone species on every corner. Let us first return to our example of strawberries. Cloning, by definition, produces offspring that are genetically identical to the parent. A genetically identical species, however, is more vulnerable to disease than a genetically diverse species, as every single individual organism has the same DNA and thus the same method of fighting off infection. When a pathogen arrives that can circumvent this defense, then the species is essentially helpless and will die out. A historical example of this is the Great Famine in Ireland, where the potato crop, that reproduces through cloning utterly died out when attacked by a fungus, causing the deaths of millions of people. In conclusion, cloning is the process of creating genetically identical organisms. It is a burgeoning yet expensive field of science with many potential applications in the future, although, like most things, it is not without its drawbacks.